About a couple years ago I did a little video review thing on Star Trek The Next Generation for the Nintendo Entertainment System, essentially a starship simulator thing that seemed like a good idea in concept, but the game itself ended up being rather meh, for lack of a better term. Now in that same review, I mentioned that in addition to the NES version in question, the same game was also released for the original Nintendo Game Boy and the Sega Game Gear, and the Game Gear version is the one we're looking at today. So for those unfamiliar with said game, Next Generation puts you in the role of a promising young Starfleet cadet not named Wesley Crusher.
Shut up, Wesley!
Who is given command of the Galaxy-class starship Enterprise 1701D and must complete the missions given to him within the time allotted. Success will bring you promotion, and promotion will bring you more challenging missions. There's no real storyline beyond that though. No hidden agenda or no building towards a climactic ending. There's actually no ending to speak of at all. You're just charged with a series of randomly generated missions that seem to range from rescuing colonists to defending planets against invaders to escorting ambassadors from planet Vulcan to prevent war or something. Really generic stuff, uninteresting, and having nothing to do with exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations, and boldly going where no one has gone before. You know, that sort of thing that nobody seems to care about apparently. Each mission begins with a briefing from Captain Jean-Luc Picard detailing your mission objectives, and a couple text blocks before spending the rest of the game in his quarters playing his Resican flute or counting lights or something. The majority of the game will take place on the bridge, comprising the main view screen along with 5 Starfleet communicators, insignias, whatever you want to call them, each of which represent a different department manned by each of the senior crew. Worf handles the deflector shields and weapons, Data handles navigation and sensors, LaForge handles engineering and damage control, O'Brien handles transporter controls, and Rikers handles sitting there and looking pretty, only serving to remind you of your mission objectives along with informing you when time is running short. Starship operations apparently work differently on the Enterprise than they do on other starships. Usually if you want to allocate resources or enter standard orbit, you give orders or go through a menu to perform the required actions. Here you play mini-games. Some of these make sense, such as this mini-game where you're attempting to assume a standard orbit around a planet, and then there's stuff like this where you allocate power by playing this mini-game where you're guiding the circuits and stuff. Makes for interesting diversion, yes, but in the end, it just seems like pointless filler, especially considering the 16-bit iterations of Next Generation have simpler, more straightforward means of performing these tasks. I mean, I would gladly do away with these mini-games if it meant freeing up space for potential away missions that would have been perfect for a game like this. Controlling the ship itself is fairly simple stuff. D-pad moves the ship around, buttons shoot your phasers and photons, pressing start alternates between controlling the ship and conferring with your crew. You can also control the speed of your ship. It should be noted that while controls are mostly responsive, piloting the Enterprise is akin to driving a snail. The ship turns slowly, it's not at all maneuverable, and it's just a cumbersome vessel to move around. That's not a bad thing. This is, after all, a massive capital ship, and it should control like one. It should not be moving or driving like a starfighter as a result. Of course, nobody told the enemy vessels this little deal, and you might have a hard time keeping up with whatever target you happen to be chasing down, even when you're at a full stop. But you do have sensors and an overview of the sector to look for ships. That helps a bit, I guess. On the plus side though, presentation's a rather substantial step above the NES version, where you were sitting in a drab blue bridge that only vaguely resembled a view screen from the show. Here the view screen retains its original beige color and the various ships and planets look much better, as do the various mugshots of the senior crew. The additional color palette certainly helps in giving the overall visuals a much richer look that wasn't possible on the NES. I also like the sequences where the Enterprise goes to warp and drops out at their next destination. A nice touch I suppose, although I wish there was some consistencies regarding the planets. Sometimes Vulcan is a purple planet, sometimes it's a green planet, and maybe if you were really lucky, you'll get a mission that takes you to a planet Vulcan that is the proper orange-brownish color that it was depicted in. As far as the sound goes, well, the game does boast a respectable iteration of the Next Generation / motion picture theme, along with a couple other musical cues that are just somewhat hit or miss. But the sound effects are rather meh. That's as far as I'll go in that regard, because it's just meh sound overall. I don't even know what that means, but meh. That's all I got. When I did the review for the NES version of Next Generation, I mentioned that the overall game would have probably made for a better portable experience, as it was a game that felt rather lacking on the NES. And while playing this Game Gear iteration of Next Generation has certainly lent some credence to that particular theory, it's still not that great of a game. Mind you, it's not that I think that Next Gen is bad. For the most part, the idea is sound and the execution to a certain extent works. It's just that this is a game with very little substance to it that it's just not worth more than a couple rounds of playtime at most. And for a portable entry, this is just fine, I guess. I suppose this might appeal to the Trekkie who wants a simple game that lets him fly the Enterprise around for a bit, but if you're looking for something a little deeper, perhaps something with a little more meat to it, then this will probably not be your cup of tea Earl Grey hot. And that's how I'm ending it. Good night.